Tyler Reed had spent years behind the counter of his father's gun shop in small-town Tennessee, and in all that time, he'd never once been wrong about a piece. So when an elderly black woman walked in carrying something wrapped in old canvas, rusted, cracked, barely worth a second glance, he laughed. He'd seen enough to know junk when he saw it. But Evelyn Carter didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him and said 4 quiet words that would unravel everything he thought he knew. Check the serial number. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The town of Harwick, Tennessee wasn't the kind of place that made the news. It sat tucked between 2 low ridgelines like something the mountains had quietly forgotten, and the people there mostly liked it that way. Strangers passed through on Route 9, gassed up at the Sunoco on the corner of Mercer and Main, and kept moving. The ones who stayed knew everybody's name and everybody's business, and that suited them just fine. Reed Precision Arms sat at the end of a gravel lot on the south end of Main Street, wedged between a bait shop and a hardware store that had been slowly dying since the Walmart opened 15 miles east. The sign above the door was hand-painted, dark green letters on a cream background, a little faded from 7 Tennessee summers, but still sharp enough to mean something. It had been Tyler Reed's father's shop first, a man who could strip and reassemble a 1903 Springfield blindfolded, who treated every firearm like it carried a name. Tyler had inherited the building, the tools, and the reputation. The patience was another matter. At 26, Tyler Reed was good. He knew it, and more to the point, he made sure everyone around him knew it too. His hands were steady, his eye was precise, and he had the kind of instinctive feel for metalwork that took most gunsmiths a decade to develop. Customers came from 3 counties over for his restoration work, a refinished Browning of 5, a rebuilt lever-action Winchester, a Colt 1911 brought back from a corroded near ruin. He had the certificates on the wall and the photos on the counter to prove it. But somewhere along the way, the craft had started to feel like a scoreboard. The more complex the job, the more he talked about it. The shinier the piece, the more interested he got. If someone walked through the door with a cracked stock and a pitted barrel on a rifle that wasn't worth more than sentimental value, Tyler had a habit of glancing up, clocking it in about 3 seconds, and delivering a verdict like he was doing them a favor. His assistant, Liam Bauer, had pointed this out once, gently, the way Liam did most things. Tyler had laughed it off. He wasn't wrong, was he? You didn't take a rusted-out junker to a fine watchmaker and expect them to be enthusiastic. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when Evelyn Carter walked through the door. Tyler was behind the counter working on a disassembled semi-auto that belonged to a deer hunter from Clarkson County. Liam was near the back, running a cleaning rod through the barrel of a bolt-action that had come in the day before. The bell above the door gave its usual flat jingle, and Tyler looked up with the automatic half-smile he used for customers before he'd assessed whether they were worth the full version. He assessed quickly. The woman was in her late 70s, maybe older. It was hard to say. She was tall for her age, and she moved with the kind of deliberate steadiness that wasn't slowness exactly, but more like a refusal to be rushed. She wore a dark wool coat, buttoned to the top despite the mild afternoon, and she carried something in her arms wrapped in thick cloth, cream-colored canvas, folded carefully around whatever was inside. Her face was unreadable, not blank, but composed. Her eyes moved across the shop the way someone reads a room they've walked into before and found wanting. Tyler watched her approach the counter. "Help you?" he said. "I hope so," she said. Her voice was measured, unhurried. She set the wrapped object down on the glass-top counter with both hands, gently. He waited for her to explain. She didn't explain. She began to unwrap. He'd seen all kinds of guns come through that door, milsurp rifles, Civil War-era revolvers, shotguns that had been leaning in barn corners for 40 years. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he believed, but when the canvas fell away and the rifle lay there under the shop's fluorescent light, Tyler's first reaction was a short, involuntary laugh. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was the kind that escapes before you decide to let it. The rifle was old. He couldn't immediately place the era, and it had not been cared for. The woodstock was deeply cracked along the grain, darkened with age and something that might have been oil or might have been decades of handling. The barrel was corroded along the entire length, brown-red rust running from muzzle to action in uneven patches. The metal furniture, what was left of it, had pitted so badly that the original finish was entirely gone. Whatever this rifle had once been, it had been through a great deal since then. "I'm sorry," Tyler said, though his tone was anything but. He folded his arms and leaned back slightly. "Where exactly did you find this?" "My father's house," the woman said. "And your father was—" "A man who believed in keeping things," she said, "even when other people thought they weren't worth keeping." Tyler glanced at Liam, who had drifted up from the back and was now standing near the end of the counter, watching quietly. Tyler looked back at the rifle. "Ma'am, I don't want to be unkind," he said, "but this thing—" He gestured at it with 2 fingers like he was indicating roadkill. "Belongs in a museum trash bin. Respectfully. There's nothing here worth restoring. The stock's probably beyond repair, the barrel's corroded past safe tolerances, and I can't even tell you what the action looks like under all that rust. I'd be charging you money to tell you it can't be done." The woman didn't move. She didn't stiffen or flush or tear up. She watched him with the same steady expression she'd walked in with, and for just a moment, Tyler had the uncomfortable feeling that she had already heard everything he was going to say and had decided in advance that it wouldn't matter. "You didn't look at it," she said. "I looked at it." "You glanced at it," she said. "Ah, that's different." He opened his mouth and closed it again. Behind him, he heard Liam make a small sound that might have been a suppressed cough. "All right," Tyler said. He picked up the rifle, carefully, reflexively, because however dismissive he was being, 20 years of his father's voice in the back of his head made it impossible for him to handle a firearm carelessly, and turned it over in his hands. He looked at the stock, the receiver, the barrel. Nothing changed his first impression except— "Check the serial number," the woman said. Tyler looked up at her. "Excuse me?" "The serial number," she said again, simply, "before you tell me what it's worth." He would have refused, just to make the point that he'd already made his assessment and didn't need further instruction from a customer who'd brought him a piece of junk. But there was something in the way she said it, not a plea, not a demand, just a statement of what he should do if he had any actual professionalism in him, that made the refusal feel smaller than he wanted it to feel. He turned the rifle over and looked toward the receiver where the serial would be stamped. The rust was heavy there. He set the rifle on the counter, grabbed a soft cloth and a bit of penetrating oil, and worked at the surface lightly. Not a restoration attempt, just enough to see. What emerged from beneath the corrosion was strange. He stared at it. The number, or what he'd expected to be a standard serial format, wasn't quite that. The character spacing was wrong. The depth of the engraving was inconsistent in a way that told him it hadn't been stamped by a press, but worked by hand. And the prefix characters, he didn't recognize the format. He'd processed hundreds of military surplus rifles, pre-war and post-war. He'd handled Civil War carbines, WWI bolt actions, WWII-era everything. He knew the serial systems. He knew the manufacturer codes, the proof marks, the inspection stamps. This didn't fit any of them. He frowned before he could stop himself. "Something wrong?" Liam asked from beside him. He'd leaned in, close enough to see. "Nothing's wrong," Tyler said automatically. "It's probably a botched stamp. Happens sometimes, especially on rifles that were rebuilt or rebarreled after the war." "That's not a botched stamp," Liam said. Tyler looked at him. Liam was bent slightly forward, his reading glasses sitting low on his nose, squinting at the receiver. Liam Bauer was 32 and had spent 6 years doing archival work for a military history foundation before he'd pivoted to gunsmithing and ended up here. He wasn't flashy about what he knew, but Tyler had learned the hard way not to dismiss him when he said something like that. "The engraving depth changes mid-character," Liam said. "See there? And that prefix," he pointed without touching, "that spacing is deliberate. Somebody did this by hand, not factory, not a rebuild mark. Deliberate." The shop was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator unit at the back hummed. Traffic moved somewhere outside. "Or you just don't know what you're looking at," the woman said. Her voice was calm as still water. Tyler looked at her sharply. That was almost exactly what he'd been thinking about her 5 minutes ago. The reversal of it landed in a way he didn't entirely like. "I know what I'm looking at," he said. "Then tell me what it is," she said. He had no answer for that, not a real one. He set the rifle down and stood straight, buying himself a second. "That rifle," she said quietly, "was never supposed to exist on paper." The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Liam had gone still. Tyler found that the laugh that had come so easily 20 minutes ago was nowhere near him now. He thought about reaching for it, the way he might reach for a familiar tool, and came up empty. He cleared his throat. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Identify it," she said. "That's all. I don't want it restored. I don't want it polished. I want you to tell me what it is. And if I can, I'll pay you well," she said. "If you can tell me correctly, the unit, and the purpose, the man who carried it. If you can't," she picked up one corner of the canvas and began to fold it slowly back over the rifle, "I walk out with it, and we forget this conversation." Tyler looked at the partially wrapped rifle. He looked at the strange markings just barely visible under the cloth's edge. He thought about every database he had access to, every contact in the collector network, every resource he'd never needed to use because he already knew his answers before he asked the questions. He thought about the fact that he had no idea what this was. "Deal," he said. She nodded as if it were settled and stepped back from the counter. At the door, she paused. She turned back with the rifle still in her arms, and she said, in exactly the same tone she'd used for everything else, quiet and certain, "When you figure it out, you'll understand why people disappeared over it." Then she was gone. The bell over the door gave its flat jingle. The sound of her footsteps faded across the gravel lot. Tyler stood at the counter for a long moment, looking at the door. Liam said nothing. Tyler looked down at the empty counter where the rifle had been, then toward the back where she'd left it. She hadn't taken it after all, he realized. It sat on the workbench now, canvas folded back. The corroded barrel caught the light. He wasn't laughing anymore. Hours after closing, the shop still had its lights on. Tyler hadn't gone home. He'd locked the front door, put on a fresh pot of coffee, and dragged the gooseneck work lamp over to the main bench where the rifle sat. He'd been staring at it and working on it in the careful, a minimal way that wasn't restoration, but was something like introduction for the better part of 3 hours. The shop at night was a different place. Without customers coming and going, without the phone and the background noise of a workday, it got quiet enough that you could hear the building settle. Tyler usually found that satisfying. Tonight, it felt like pressure. Under the work lamp, the rifle gave up more than it had under the fluorescence. The rust was still pervasive, still daunting, but the lamp's angled light threw the surface features into relief, and Tyler began to see things he'd missed. Marks. Not in the obvious places where you'd expect stamps and proofs, but in the margins, tucked along the underside of the receiver, along the edge of the trigger guard housing, at the base of the stock where the wood met the metal plate. Tiny things, deliberate things. He reached for his magnifying visor and pulled it down over his eyes, adjusting the lens until the surface of the barrel filled his vision. The marks weren't decorative, they weren't random, they were systematic. A small person of notation that someone had applied with extreme care and very small tools. Not factory work. This had been done by hand, slowly, by someone who knew what they were doing and didn't want it found. Tyler pulled off the visor and rubbed his eyes. He moved to the computer at the back desk, an old tower that chugged along on Windows 10, and started pulling up databases. He had access to 3 military surplus identification systems, a digitized manufacturer archive that covered domestic production from 1880 through 1980. And a hobbyist collector network with tens of thousands of cataloged serial ranges. He'd used all of them before. He'd never needed more than 1 or 2 minutes to identify a piece. He spent 90 minutes tonight. He found nothing. The serial prefix matched no known manufacturer. The character format fell outside every standardized system he had access to. He cross-referenced against wartime proof marks from every major Allied nation, against OSS procurement records that had been partially declassified in the 90s, against a digitized index of British and Commonwealth military production. 0 matches. The rifle, as far as every official record was concerned, didn't exist. He leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. Liam showed up at 9:15, which wasn't entirely surprising. Tyler had texted him a photo of the serial 2 hours earlier with no explanation, and Liam had replied 15 minutes after that with 3 question marks, and then nothing. He knocked once and let himself in with his key, still wearing his jacket, and came to stand at the bench. "I couldn't sleep," Liam said. "I haven't tried," Tyler said. They both looked at the rifle. "Black Ops," Liam said. Not a question exactly, more like a thought finding its shape out loud. "Don't jump there," Tyler said, though his voice lacked its usual authority on the subject. "I'm not jumping anywhere. I'm saying the evidence points somewhere, and that's where it points." Liam set his jacket on a stool and bent over the rifle. "Look at these marks. You've looked at them, right?" "For 3 hours. Then you see it." "They're not manufacturer marks. They're not proof marks. They're not owner stamps. They're not collector marks. They're a notation system, internal to something that didn't use external documentation." He straightened. "That's wartime black operations behavior, or something adjacent to it. There are 100 other explanations." "Name 2, Liam said. Tyler didn't name any. He got up, refilled his coffee, and stood at the back window looking out at the dark lot. Somewhere in the middle distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. "I'm going to call Gregson in the morning," he said. Douglas Gregson was 71 years old and lived in a house in Western Virginia that was approximately 60% lined with books and 40% lined with old guns. He'd spent his career as a military historian before moving full-time into private collecting, and he'd served as a consultant on 2 separate federal declassification projects before the government had decided he asked too many questions and quietly stopped inviting him. If anyone in Tyler's network would recognize an anomalous serial system, it was Gregson. He called at 8 the next morning before the shop officially opened. He sent the photographs first, a dozen shots from different angles, the clearest image he'd been able to get of the serial and the surrounding marks. He waited for Gregson to pull them up and have a look. He could hear the old man's breathing on the other end of the line, slow and deliberate. Then a long silence. "Doug?" Tyler said. "Where did you get this?" Gregson said. His voice was different, flat. "Customer brought it in yesterday. Wanted an identification." Another silence. "Destroy those photos," Gregson said. Tyler blinked. "Excuse me?" "Delete the images. Don't send them anywhere else. Don't post them. Don't show anyone." "Doug, I don't know what you're—" "Leave it alone, Tyler." Gregson's voice had dropped, not to a whisper, more like the tone of someone choosing each word with precision. "Put that rifle in a box, give it back to whoever brought it, and tell them you couldn't identify it. Don't ask questions about it. Don't dig into it. Just let it go." "You recognized it," Tyler said. "I'm telling you to leave it alone." "Doug." The line went dead. Tyler stood holding the phone in a shop that suddenly felt smaller than it had 5 minutes ago. He set the phone down on the bench and looked at the rifle. Behind him, Liam said, "So he recognized it." "Yeah," Tyler said. "And he told you to stop." "Yeah." "Which means we're not stopping." Tyler looked at him. Liam was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, expression neutral, but eyes alert. Tyler had the sudden, clear recognition that this was what having a partner actually meant. Not someone who agreed with you, but someone who read the same situation you read and arrived at the same conclusion. "No," Tyler said. "We're not stopping." It was later that same afternoon, around 3, when Evelyn Carter came back. Tyler hadn't been sure he'd see her again so soon. She'd struck him as someone who moved on her own schedule, not anyone else's. But the bell over the door rang, and there she was. Same wool coat, same steady bearing. She walked to the counter and stood there. And she looked at Tyler without saying anything for a long moment, the way a person looks at something they're deciding whether to trust. "You called someone," she said. It wasn't a guess. "A historian," Tyler said. "He's a contact. I thought he might know the serial system." "And?" "He told me to stop." She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she'd already known. "What did you do?" "I kept going," Tyler said. Something shifted in her expression, not a smile, something quieter than a smile, an acknowledgement. She moved to the side of the counter and looked at the rifle, where it lay under the lamp. Tyler noticed she didn't touch it. She looked at it the way someone looks at a grave, with recognition and a kind of grief that had been carried long enough to feel almost like peace. "My father carried that rifle," she said. Tyler waited. "But it wasn't issued to him," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean it wasn't issued?" "Exactly what I said," she answered. "It was never logged, never processed through supply, never attached to his name in any official capacity. He carried it, he used it, but as far as any record is concerned, he never had it." "Then how did he get it?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "How long did your father have this shop?" The shift surprised him. "He ran it for over 30 years. He built it." "Did he ever explain to you what a thing is worth?" she asked. "Not the dollar value, the real worth." Tyler thought about his father. The careful hands, the reverence for old steel, the way he'd once spent 6 hours cleaning a WWI-era revolver that a widow had brought in, taken not a cent for it, and explained afterward that some things you do because they need doing. "Yeah," Tyler said quietly. "He did." Evelyn nodded. "My father spent his life explaining the same thing. He said that what gets remembered and what actually happened are two separate countries. He believed—" She paused, choosing, "that the rifle was the only honest record left of what he was part of." "What was he part of?" Tyler asked. She was quiet for a moment. The shop held the sound of the lamp's low hum and the distant noise of a truck passing on Route 9. "The man who owned that rifle before my father," she said, "never officially existed." Tyler went still. She said it with the same measured calm she brought to everything. no drama, no pause for effect, but the words arrived with the quiet weight of something that had been stored a very long time and only now set down. He thought about Gregson's voice, the flatness of it, the drop in register that wasn't fear exactly, but was the territory adjacent to it. He thought about the serial that matched nothing, the hand-cut notation marks, the engraving depth that Liam had clocked in 10 seconds as deliberate. A rifle that never existed, carried by a man who never existed, given to a soldier whose name was in no supply record. Who was he? Tyler asked. Evelyn looked at him steadily. That, she said, is the question that got people killed. She left shortly after, again without ceremony, without urgency. Just collected herself and walked out, leaving the rifle behind. Tyler stood at the bench for a long time after she'd gone. He reached out and put one hand on the rifle stock without gripping it, a contact, not a hold. He could feel the grain of the old wood, rough and uneven under his palm. Liam appeared from the back. She came back. Yeah. What did she say? Tyler looked at the rifle. Then he looked at Liam. Her father carried this, but it was given to him by someone who doesn't officially exist. Liam was quiet for a moment, thinking. And the person who told Gregson to shut up. Same world, Tyler said. I think. So this isn't just an undocumented rifle, Liam said. No, Tyler said. I don't think it is anymore. He turned back to the bench, pulled the lamp closer, and reached for his tools. Whatever this thing was, whatever it had been through, no, whoever had carried it in darkness through missions that never made it to any file, it was real. It was here. And somewhere inside the rust and the old wood and the hand-cut marks of a notation system no database had ever cataloged, there was a story that someone had spent a very long time making sure no one would ever find. Tyler had laughed at it yesterday. He didn't feel like laughing now. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October sky that sat low over Harwick like a lid pressed down. Tyler had gone home somewhere past midnight, slept badly for 4 hours, and was back at the shop by 6:15. He made coffee, unlocked the workbench, and pulled the rifle under the lamp again. He didn't touch it right away. He sat across from it on a stool and drank his coffee and looked at it the way he'd never looked at any piece before, not as a problem to solve, but as a thing that had its own history, its own weight, its own right to be complicated. That was new for him. He noticed it. He started digging before Liam arrived. The consumer databases had turned up nothing, and Gregson had gone silent, so Tyler went deeper. He had a login to a partially declassified NARA archive that a former Army collector had shared with him 3 years ago. Gray area access that he'd used exactly twice for legitimate research. He used it now. He searched serial prefix formats first. Nothing. He searched by caliber and action type, trying to narrow the rifle's probable origin decade. He found several possibilities, but nothing that matched the hand-applied notation system. Then he shifted approach entirely and started searching the margins, not the rifle itself, but the edges of what the rifle suggested. Unofficial units, undocumented operations, the category of military activity that appeared in declassified files only as redacted blocks and administrative absences. He found fragments, not answers, fragments, references to soldiers listed by number rather than name, mission designations that appeared once in a document and were never referenced again, supply requests for non-standard equipment that had been signed and then retroactively struck through, the bureaucratic fingerprints of things that were meant to vanish. By the time Liam came in at 8, Tyler had printed 11 pages and spread them across the back desk. Liam looked at them without speaking for a moment, moving slowly along the row, reading. Then he pulled a stool up and sat down and put on his glasses. "Ghost units," he said. "That's where it's pointing," Tyler said. "Not just any ghost units." Liam picked up one of the printed pages, a partially declassified Army report from the mid-1960s that referenced a personnel designation system Tyler didn't recognize. This format here, the alphanumeric prefix before the operator number, I've seen something like this before. Not in any mainstream archive. In a secondary source, a researcher named Aldrich wrote a paper about it in the 90s. He set the page down. It was pulled from the journal before it was properly indexed. The university said it was a formatting error. Nobody really believed that. Tyler looked at him. "You know this off the top of your head." "I spent 4 years cataloging military history documents for a foundation," Liam said. "Some things stick." He paused. "The units that used this designation system, if I'm right about what I'm looking at, were recruited specifically for deniability. They weren't just off the books. They were chosen because losing them wouldn't create a paper trail that anyone would follow." The room was quiet. Tyler thought about that. He thought about what it meant to be chosen because your absence wouldn't register, because your name wasn't the kind of name that got senators on the phone or journalists making calls. He looked at the rifle on the bench, and he thought about Evelyn Carter's father carrying it through whatever darkness these fragments described. And he felt something in his chest that hadn't been there 2 days ago. "They picked people who wouldn't be missed," Tyler said. "Minorities," Liam said. He said it evenly, not as an accusation, but as a documented fact, which somehow made it worse. "Outsiders. People whose families had limited political reach. People whose disappearance would be filed and forgotten." He took his glasses off and cleaned them with the hem of his shirt. That was the operational logic. Keep the unit hidden by making sure no one goes looking. Tyler sat with that for a moment. Then he got up and went to the rifle. He'd been working on it in stages, minimal intervention, just enough to reveal what was there without disturbing it. He picked up a soft brass brush and a cloth and went back to the underside of the barrel. Where the night before he'd noticed what looked like an additional mark near the muzzle end. He worked slowly, carefully. The rust came away in fine powder. Beneath it, the steel was dark with age, but intact. The corrosion had been surface level here, not structural. And as the mark emerged from beneath the oxidation, Tyler felt the hairs on the back of his arm lift. It wasn't a manufacturer's stamp. It wasn't a proof mark. It was a symbol, small, deliberate, cut into the metal by someone who knew what they were doing with a graver. A circle with a broken line through it, and beneath that, 3 characters that weren't quite letters and weren't quite numbers. "Liam," Tyler said. Liam came over, bent down, looked. He was silent for a long moment. "Unofficial unit insignia," he said. "They used to mark equipment that couldn't be officially serialized. It's a way of tracking assets within a unit when you can't use standard logistics." He straightened. "This rifle was fielded by someone, Tyler. Someone in a unit that kept its own records because it couldn't use anyone else's." Tyler set down the brush. He looked at the mark and thought about the man who'd put it there, bent over this rifle somewhere, in some light worse than this one, cutting those 3 characters into the steel with steady hands, knowing that the mark might be the only proof that either of them had ever existed. He was still thinking about that when the bell over the front door rang. Tyler went through the interior door into the shop front, expecting a customer. The man standing inside wasn't a regular. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, all built like someone who had once been athletic and kept most of it, wearing a jacket that was too clean for the weather and shoes that were wrong for Harwick. He had a collector's air about him, or something designed to look like one. "Morning," Tyler said. "Can I help you?" "Hope so." The man smiled. It was a social smile, deployed rather than felt. I'm in the area looking at some pieces. Heard you might handle non-standard acquisitions. We do restorations mostly, Tyler said. What kind of piece are you after? Old military stuff, pre-Vietnam era, ideally. He moved along the display case slowly, hands behind his back, looking down through the glass. Particularly interested in unregistered serials, pieces that fell outside the standard logistics system. Tyler kept his expression neutral. It cost him something. We don't get much of that, he said. No? That's a shame. The man looked up at him with the same easy smile. If anything comes through, unregistered, undocumented, unusual marking systems, I'd pay very well. Above market. He set a card on the counter. No questions asked. He left the card and left the shop, and the bell over the door gave its jingle, and Tyler stood very still at the counter until he heard the sound of a car starting in the gravel lot and pulling away. He picked up the card. It had a name, Harlan Cross, and a number. Nothing else. He went to the window and watched the car. Dark, nondescript, rental plates, ease out onto the main road and disappear. When he went back into the workshop, Liam was standing in the doorway. He'd heard. That wasn't a collector, Liam said. No, Tyler said. It wasn't. He set the card down on the bench. He and Liam both looked at it and then at the rifle. Someone else is looking for it, Liam said. Yeah. Which means they know it's out there. Or they know it surfaced, Tyler said, which means somehow he stopped. Evelyn wasn't careful enough, or she was careful enough, but it didn't matter, or there's a system watching for this that's more active than she expected. He thought about her face when she'd come back the second time, the way she'd said, "You called someone," not accusing him, just noting it, as if it confirmed a sequence she'd already mapped. He thought about her other line. I didn't bring it to you because you were the best. I brought it because you didn't know what it was. He hadn't understood that until right now. Someone who didn't know what it was couldn't accidentally tip off the wrong person through the right channels. He was outside the network. He was safe, specifically because he'd been ignorant. And then he'd called Gregson. I brought them here, Tyler said quietly. Liam didn't argue with that. Maybe, he said, or Gregson's phone is monitored, and they were already moving. He paused. Either way, they're here now. When Evelyn arrived that afternoon, Tyler told her about the man immediately. He didn't soften it. He described the jacket, the shoes, the phrasing, unregistered serials, unusual marking systems, and the name on the card. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't bring it to you because you were the best. I brought it because you didn't know what it was. He stared at her. I know, he said. I just figured that out. She looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was something he hadn't seen from her before, not quite approval, but a kind of recalibration, as if she was updating her assessment of him. My father wasn't recruited, she said. He was selected. Those are different things. She turned to look at the rifle. Recruitment means you have a choice. Selection means someone decided, and your opinion wasn't part of the equation. She was quiet for a moment. He was 23 years old. He was a good shot. He was physically exceptional, and nobody of consequence would ask questions about where he'd gone. That was the qualification. Tyler said nothing. He carried that rifle for 4 years, she said. Through things I only know in pieces. He wasn't a man who talked about it, but he kept the rifle. He kept it because... She stopped, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved across her face that wasn't her usual composure. It was there and gone. Because it was the only proof that any of it had happened, that he had been there, that those men had been there. Who was the man who owned it before him? Tyler asked. Evelyn looked at the rifle. "That rifle was used in a mission the government buried," she said. "Buried it because it succeeded too well. Because what it uncovered, what those men found at the end of it, was something that certain people needed to stay hidden." She turned back to Tyler. "The man who carried it first was the one who found it. And then he was gone." "Gone how?" Liam said. McKee was standing in the doorway again. Evelyn looked at him, then back at Tyler. "Gone the way people go," she said, "when they know too much and nobody wants them to keep knowing it." The three of them stood in the workshop with the rifle between them, and the afternoon light came through the single high window and fell across the bench in a long, pale stripe. Tyler looked at the rifle, at the surface marks he'd spent 2 days uncovering, at the symbol beneath the barrel, at the strange serial that matched no database and followed no known format. And he understood for the first time what he was actually holding. Not junk, not a curiosity, not a restoration project. Proof. 2 nights later, Tyler did something he wouldn't have done a week ago, not because he lacked the capability, but because he'd never cared enough to cross the line. He broke into a restricted archive. It wasn't cinematic, it was quiet and methodical. A contact he'd made years ago through the Collector Network, a man named Whitfield, who had once worked federal IT procurement and still maintained a few back-channel logins he'd never formally surrendered. Tyler called in a favor he'd been holding for 2 years, a favor that Whitfield had always expected Tyler would use for something personal, and now Tyler was using for something he couldn't explain in a single sentence. He spent 40 minutes with access he wasn't supposed to have inside a federal records archive that had been partially digitized in 2011 and then quietly de-indexed from public access in 2014. He wasn't hacking. He was walking through an unlocked door someone else had left open. But the intent was the same, and he knew it. And he didn't stop. What he found wasn't a file. It wasn't a report. It was a cross-referencing anomaly, a database field that had been zeroed out but not fully scrubbed, like a word erased from a page that still left a faint impression in the paper. The anomaly linked to a unit designation that matched the prefix structure Liam had identified. And inside that designation, buried 3 layers deep in a records taxonomy that shouldn't have led anywhere, was a single table. It wasn't a serial number. It was a code. Tyler sat back from the screen and looked at what he'd found. Then he called Liam. Liam arrived 20 minutes later and spent 10 minutes with the printed page before he leaned back and said, "That's a composite code, 3 fields embedded in a single string." "Walk me through it," Tyler said. Liam pointed to the printed string. "This first segment, this is a unit designation. Not a standard military unit, an ad hoc operational cell assembled for a single mission and then dissolved. This second segment here, this is a mission identifier. Looks like a date-based code, which would put the operation somewhere in a specific window I can narrow down." He moved his finger along the string. "And this last segment, this is an operator number, not a name, a number, because names were never used." "Can you get a name from it?" Tyler asked. "Not directly, but the operator number in combination with the unit designation, if there's any surviving secondary record that uses both, might lead to a name or a description of a name." Tyler looked at the code, then at the rifle, which sat on the bench behind him under the lamp. "The code is cut into the serial," he said. "Yes. So whoever stamped that serial was encoding the unit, the mission, and the operator number into the rifle itself. Turning it into a record," Liam said, "a self-contained record that could survive outside any system, because if the system was ever purged, and it was, the rifle would still exist." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "The man who did that," he said, "knew they were going to be erased." Liam said nothing. He didn't need to. Tyler spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing the mission identifier against every date-coded reference in his printed material, Liam's notes, and the fragments he'd pulled from the declassified archive earlier in the week. The search was slow and imprecise. He was working with partial information against records that had been deliberately fragmented, but around 2 in the morning, a shape began to emerge. A shape and a name. Or rather, a name-shaped absence. The records, such as they were, listed the operator at that number as NE, never enlisted, not found, not record unavailable. NE, a specific designation that meant the person had been officially categorized as someone who had no military history, because for the purposes of any official record, they had never entered the system in the first place. Someone had done that actively. Someone had gone into a record and stamped NE beside an operator number that corresponded to a real human being who had carried a real rifle through a real mission. He had Liam check the designation system. Liam confirmed NE was applied deliberately, not as an error. It required a manual entry from someone with sufficient clearance. It was, functionally, an erasure, but it left a seam because whoever had applied it had needed to create the record in order to mark it as non-existent. You couldn't erase someone without first writing their name down. When Evelyn arrived the next morning, Tyler set the printed code on the counter in front of her and walked her through what he'd found. He was methodical about it, not performing, just presenting. He had changed, even in the way he explained things. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to inform her. She listened the way she always listened, completely still, completely present, and when he finished, she looked at the code for a long time. Then she said, "He trained my father." Tyler looked at her. "The man marked NE," she said. "The one who never officially existed. He found my father, trained him, and worked beside him for 4 years." Her hands were flat on the counter. "And the night the mission ended, the night they came back, he was gone by morning. No body, no explanation, no record that he had ever been there." She paused. "My father looked for him for decades, never found a trace, because there was no trace left to find." The shop was very quiet. Tyler said, "What did the mission expose?" Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Something political," she said. "Something that, if it had been reported, if those men had been allowed to report it, would have implicated people who were never implicated. People who were, by that point, moving into positions where they needed clean records." "What kind of positions?" Liam said. "Influential ones," she said. "The kind that don't survive scrutiny." She straightened slightly. "The mission succeeded. They found what they were sent to find, and they documented it, and they were preparing to bring it out. And then the order came down, not to stand down, not to abort, just silence. And the man who carried that rifle first was the one who had done the documenting." She paused. "He was the most dangerous of them, because he was the one who understood what they'd found." "So they erased him," Tyler said. "They erased all of them," she said. "My father survived because he was careful, because the man who trained him had taught him how to survive the people you work for, not just the people you work against." She looked at the rifle. "He never talked about the mission in full, but he talked about the man. He said—" She paused, and her voice was steady, but something in it had thinned. "Just slightly, that he was the most honest person he had ever met in a life full of dishonest situations." Tyler felt the weight of that settle over the room. He thought about the hands that had built this rifle, or rather modified it, adapted it, encoded it. He thought about someone sitting somewhere and cutting those marks into the steel with the knowledge that the official record would be cleared, and the only thing that would carry the truth forward was this object. A rifle. A rusted, battered, cracked stock rifle that everyone who saw it would immediately dismiss. He thought about how he had laughed. He didn't say anything about that. He just looked at the rifle, and for the first time, he felt genuinely ashamed of himself. Not in a performative way. Not in the way he might have articulated shame if someone had asked him to describe it. In the quiet, specific way of knowing that you were wrong before you were right, and that the gap between the two had cost something. He was still standing at the bench when the back door, the service entrance that came off the side lot, opened, and Liam, who had been in the rear storage area, appeared in the doorway. His expression was controlled, but tight. "There's a car," he said. "Same model as the one from 2 days ago. It's been in the lot for 20 minutes. Tyler turned slowly to look at Evelyn. She had already moved, standing now with her back to the wall beside the window, angled so she could see the lot without being visible from it. She'd done it instinctively, silently, without disrupting the conversation. That movement told him more about her history than anything she'd said. "2 of them," she said, looking toward the lot. "Possibly more." "Harlan Cross?" Tyler asked. "Or whoever sent him," she said. Tyler looked at the rifle. He thought about the code, the NE designation, the mission that had been buried for decades, the man who had never officially existed and had spent that non-existence cutting a record into steel. He thought about Evelyn's father carrying this rifle for years, not as a weapon, but as a testament. He thought about how close it had come, all of it, to disappearing, and how it hadn't, because an old woman had walked into a gun shop and set it on a counter in front of someone too arrogant to recognize what he was looking at. He reached out and picked up the rifle. He didn't pick it up the way he had the first time. Cursory, dismissive, 2 fingers. He picked it up the way his father had taught him, both hands, proper support, the weight distributed correctly. He held it for a moment. "What did your father want?" he asked Evelyn. "In the end, what did he want to happen with it?" She turned from the window and looked at him. The afternoon light fell across her face, and for a moment she looked exactly her age, and tired, and something else, something that might have been hope, held at a careful distance. "He wanted someone to understand what it was," she said. "Before he died, he said that was enough. Just someone who understood." She paused. "I think he was wrong about it being enough." Tyler looked at her. "You want more than understanding." "I want the truth out," she said. "In the world. No, not in a private room. In the world." Tyler nodded. He set the rifle back on the bench, carefully, the way you set down something that matters. Then he said, "What did your father know?" "Everything. Tell me all of it." "He was the last man alive," she said, "who knew what really happened." A car door closed in the lot outside. Then another. Liam appeared again in the doorway. "They're moving," he said. Evelyn turned back to the window. Tyler looked at the rifle, then at the door, then at the 2 people standing in his workshop who had, in 4 days, become the most important people in a story he hadn't known he was part of. He reached over and turned off the work lamp. In the dimness that followed, the rifle sat in shadow on the bench, and the code cut into its steel held everything it had always held. Quiet, patient, waiting to be read by someone who would finally do something about it. And then, the lights in the shop cut out entirely. Not just the lamp. Everything. The hum of the refrigerator unit died. The heating system went silent. The small green power indicator on the security panel went dark. In the sudden silence, the front door of the shop began, slowly, to open. The darkness was total and immediate. 1 second the shop existed in its ordinary way. The hum of appliances, the green glow of the security panel, the pale strip of afternoon light under the front door. The next second, all of it was gone, cut clean, and the three of them stood in a silence that felt like held breath. Tyler didn't move. His hand was still resting on the rifle's stock, and he kept it there, not gripping. Just contact, the way you keep a hand on the shoulder of something that matters. From somewhere near the front, Liam said quietly, "Grid cut, that's not a breaker." He was right. A breaker trip left residual. A flicker. A pop. The slow dying of a motor winding down. This was surgical. Someone had cut the power at the line from outside, which meant they'd been out there long enough to find it. Evelyn was already moving. Tyler couldn't see her in the dark, but he could hear the soft, deliberate sound of her footsteps. Not retreating, repositioning. She moved without urgency, without stumbling, as if she'd rehearsed this or something enough like it that her body remembered what her mind didn't need to direct. A thin bar of light appeared at the front, a flashlight beam sweeping low across the floor through the gap beneath the door. Then the door opened. Not kicked in, not forced. It opened with the controlled ease of someone who had either picked the lock or brought a key, and that was more frightening than breaking glass would have been. Three silhouettes entered in sequence. The flashlight beam swept the shop front, catching the display cases, the counter, the framed certificates on the wall. The men moved in the organized way of people who had done this before, spread out, controlled, no wasted motion. "Hand over the rifle." The voice came from the middle figure, calm, clipped, the words spaced like they'd been measured out. "Nobody gets hurt." Tyler's jaw tightened, his hand closed properly around the rifle stock now. A week ago, 4 days ago even, he might have made a calculation, assessed the risk, weighed the object against his safety, and had decided that no old gun was worth what this was pointing toward. He'd have set it on the counter and stepped back and told himself that was the rational choice. He didn't move. Evelyn stepped forward from the shadow near the side wall. She moved into the edge of the flashlight's ambient glow, visible, deliberate, making herself the thing they looked at. "You're about 40 years too late," she said. Her voice in that darkness was extraordinary. Not loud, not defiant in a theatrical way. It was simply certain, the way a person sounds when they have been expecting a moment so long that its arrival produces not fear, but a kind of grim, settled clarity. The men didn't speak, but the one with the flashlight shifted it toward her, just slightly, and that shift told Tyler something. They knew who she was. Yet they hadn't come into a dark shop hoping to find a rifle by chance. They knew this woman, or they knew of her, and they had enough operational respect for her to pause. That pause was 4 seconds, maybe 5. Evelyn used them. She turned her head slightly toward Tyler and Liam and said, low and even, "Back room, now." Tyler looked toward the workshop doorway. He looked at the 3 men. The flashlight beam was still on Evelyn. He moved. He went through the interior doorway into the workshop, rifle in hand, moving as quietly as he could across the concrete floor. Behind him he heard Liam's footsteps, then a sudden crack of sound from the shop front, sharp and immediate, and Liam's breath going out hard. Tyler spun. In the thin light leaking from the doorway, he could see Liam had been shoved. One of the men had crossed the shop floor fast and hit him into the end of the display case, and glass had come down in a flat, hard crash. Liam went into the cabinet and then down, and the sound of it, the violence of something that had been orderly and managed suddenly becoming physical, hit Tyler somewhere behind the sternum. He took a step back toward the doorway. "Tyler!" Evelyn's voice, quiet, precise. "Keep moving." He stopped. He looked at Liam, who was already pushing himself up from the floor, one hand on the cabinet, shaking glass off his arm. He was upright. He was moving. Tyler turned and went deeper into the workshop. He crossed to the workbench and thought for one stripped-down second about setting the rifle down, freeing his hands, having options. But he didn't do it. He tucked it under his left arm and kept his right hand free and moved toward the back of the space, toward the narrow door that led to the rear storage area. He heard footsteps behind him, one set, fast, and then Evelyn was through the interior doorway. She pulled it shut behind her and turned the deadbolt, the small one that Tyler's father had installed decades ago, and that Tyler had never once used. "Service door," she said. "I know," Tyler said. "Liam," she said. "He's up," Tyler said. As if to confirm it, Liam came through a second later, half limping, one hand pressed to his side where he'd hit the case, but upright and moving. He pulled the door behind him and turned to face them in the dark. "Service door," Tyler said to him. "I know where it is," Liam said. His voice was tight with pain, but steady. "It's my family's building." They moved through the storage area. Tyler had been back here hundreds of times, knew every shelf, every box, every obstacle. He navigated without light, one hand trailing the wall, the rifle held close. Behind him he could hear Evelyn moving, and behind her, Liam's slightly heavier tread. From the shop front came the sound of the deadbolt on the interior door being worked, not the lock, but the handle, methodically tried and rejected. Then something heavier, a shoulder probably, hit the door once. It held. The service door was at the far end of the storage room, a narrow metal door painted gray with a bar handle. Tyler had it open in 3 seconds. Cold air rushed in from the alley behind the building, damp, smelling of gravel and old wood and the particular cold of October evenings in hill country. He hesitated. The alley ran both directions. Left was the back of the hardware store, a dead end after 30 feet. Right was the far end of the gravel lot, and then a service road that connected to the industrial units on the south end of Mercer Street. He looked back. The storage room was dark, the interior door still holding, but he could hear the men working it with more intention now. Evelyn appeared beside him in the doorway. She looked right, then looked at Tyler. "Go now," she said. Not a shout, a command, sharp and clean, the voice of someone who understood the difference between the moment you move and the moment you've waited too long. From somewhere inside the shop came a loud, flat bang, not a gunshot, something striking metal, and the interior door groaned on its frame. Tyler went right, through the service door, into the alley. He ran. He heard Liam behind him, uneven footsteps, the hitch of his injury, but fast enough. He heard the service door bang against the exterior wall. He did not hear Evelyn follow. He ran 20 yards down the alley before that registered. He slowed, turned back. The service door was open, the gray rectangle of the doorway empty. No silhouette, no footsteps. Liam caught up, breathing hard, hand still at his side. He looked at the empty doorway. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She stayed," Liam said. Tyler stared at the open door. From inside the shop came sounds, movement, voices, nothing he could make out. The night air was cold and still around them. He stood there for 3 full seconds. The rifle was in his hands. The alley was empty in both directions. He thought about going back. Then he thought about what Evelyn had said in the workshop when she'd looked at him with that quiet, recalibrated expression. "I want the truth out. In the world." She hadn't stayed because she'd been caught. She'd stayed because she had decided to. He turned and ran. They ran without speaking. The service road behind Mercer was empty at that hour, lit by a single lamp at the far end that did more to define the darkness around it than push it back. Tyler ran with the rifle under his arm and Liam at his shoulder, and they didn't stop until they'd covered 3 blocks and turned into a residential street where the houses had their lights on, and a dog barked once from a fenced yard, and everything looked ordinary in a way that felt almost cruel. They stopped under a street light. Liam bent forward with his hands on his knees, he catching his breath, face pale. Tyler wasn't breathing much better. The cold had gotten into his lungs and he could feel his heartbeat in his ears. He looked at the rifle in his hands. It had come through the run unscathed. Of course it had. It had been through worse. "Where do we go?" Liam said. Tyler thought fast. "You said your family owns storage units." "On Fenwick Road. 4 of them. One's empty." Liam straightened. "It's not heated." "Doesn't matter," Tyler said. They moved. The storage unit was a 10-minute walk through back streets that Tyler had known since childhood, the way you know the bones of a place you grew up in, not consciously, but in your feet. The unit was the 3rd in a row behind a chain-link fence, corrugated metal walls, a sliding bar lock, a concrete floor. Liam had the key on his ring. Nay, inside it smelled of dust and old cardboard and the particular staleness of enclosed spaces that had been sealed a long time. They pulled the door down behind them. Tyler used his phone's flashlight, keeping it angled low. He set the rifle on the only flat surface, a folding table left against the wall, and stood back from it. The adrenaline was starting to ebb. In its place came something heavier and less clean. He thought about the display case shattering, Liam going down into the glass. He thought about the controlled way those men had moved, the unlocked door, the flashlight, the spread across the shop floor. Professional, practiced, not improvised. He thought about Evelyn standing in the ambient glow of that flashlight beam, calm as standing water, saying, "You're 40 years too late." He thought about leaving her there. She chose to stay," Liam said, reading him. He was sitting on an upturned paint can, pressing the heel of his hand against his ribs. She wasn't left. "I know," Tyler said. "You sure?" "She made the decision," Tyler said. "She bought us time. She knew exactly what she was doing." He paused. "Doesn't make it easier to walk away from." Liam nodded and said nothing more about it. Tyler sat down on the concrete floor, back against the cold metal wall. The chill came through his jeans immediately. He let it. It helped him think clearly in a way that warmth wouldn't have. He picked up the rifle and turned it over in his hands. He had been carrying it for 30 minutes. He had carried it out of a shop where 3 men had come specifically to take it. And he had run through dark streets with it tucked against his body, while the woman who'd trusted him with it stayed behind, by her own choosing, to slow down the people who'd come for them. He looked at the serial. He looked at the symbol on the underside of the barrel. He looked at the cracked stock, the corroded barrel, the worn metal furniture. All of it. Every mark, every scar, every deliberate cut made by someone who understood that what they were building was a record, the only kind that might survive. He thought about the composite code, the unit designation, the mission identifier, the operator number, the any stamp, never enlisted, applied to a real man who had done real things in real places and had been officially reduced to an absence in a database field. He reached for his phone and opened the photos of the printed archive fragments. He had them all, the pages from the restricted access, the cross-reference anomaly, the decoded string, the notes he and Liam had assembled across 3 days. He spread them out in his mind the way he spread components across a workbench. The shape of it was coming clear now. The mission wasn't legitimately sanctioned, Tyler said aloud. Liam looked up from where he was sitting. Someone authorized it, but that someone wasn't acting within any clean chain of command. The unit didn't report upward through standard channels. The supply requests were struck through retroactively. The mission identifier doesn't appear in any theater record from the period. Tyler turned his phone screen toward Liam. The authorization signature field in the document I pulled, it's been zeroed. Someone went in after the fact and replaced the authorizing name with a null value. The metadata shows the edit was made years after the original document was written. Liam took the phone. He looked at the screen for a long moment. A name high enough that removing it was worth the risk of the edit being discovered. High enough that the mission was run to serve that person's interests, Tyler said, and high enough that when those men found what they were sent to find, what they'd actually uncovered, it became a liability instead of a result. He set the phone down on the concrete beside him. He thought about Evelyn's words, something that would have implicated people who were never implicated, people moving into positions where they needed clean records. It was betrayal from inside their own command, Tyler said. The unit was sent by someone who then needed the evidence they'd gathered to disappear, along with the men who'd gathered it. The mission succeeded too well, Liam said quietly. They were Evelyn's words from days ago. Now they had weight and shape behind them. They found proof, Tyler said, of something that directly implicated the person who sent them, and that person, or the network around that person, decided that a group of soldiers who didn't officially exist were a simpler problem to solve than a political career. He looked at the rifle on the folding table. Evelyn's father had carried it for decades. Not as a weapon, as evidence. He had survived because the man who trained him, the man marked N.E., or the man who had never officially existed, had understood something essential. That surviving the mission wasn't the hard part. Surviving the people who sent you was. The ghost soldier had known they would come for him. So he'd built the record into the rifle, handed it to the one man he trusted to carry it forward, and then disappeared before they could reach him. He hadn't been caught. He'd made himself unfindable, which was the only version of safety available to someone the government had already decided didn't exist. Evelyn's father had spent his life being the last keeper of something too dangerous to share and too important to destroy. Tyler understood now, fully, without remainder, why she had brought it here. Not to a museum, not to a journalist, not to any of the obvious places. She had brought it to someone unknown, way outside the relevant networks, someone who had no existing relationship with the people who wanted this buried. Someone whose ignorance was the only thing that made him safe to approach. She had chosen him because he knew nothing. And in 4 days, he had become someone who knew almost everything. He got up from the floor and went to the folding table and looked at the rifle for a long moment. Then he reached for it, slowly, carefully, and turned it stock first. He looked at the base of the stock where the wood met the metal plate. The crack along the grain was deep. He'd noticed it the first day and filed it away as damage. But now, looking at it in the narrow beam of his phone light, with the understanding he'd built over 4 days, the crack looked different. It was deep but clean along one edge. Cleaner than weathering or impact would produce. He pressed the edge of the crack carefully. The wood gave, just slightly. Not the give of damaged material, the give of a seam. He went very still. He pressed again, more deliberately, and the panel along the lower stock shifted. A hidden compartment, slim and flat, running along the inner face of the stock beneath the surface wood. He eased it open with the tip of his thumbnail. Inside, folded to a tight rectangle, was a piece of paper. Not modern paper. Old paper, the color of old paper, the texture of something that had been folded and unfolded enough times to have permanently creased lines, but then folded a final time and sealed away. He lifted it out with 2 fingers and set it on the table and carefully, slowly unfolded it. It was a document, handwritten in parts. Typed in others, a combination that put its origin in an era before everything was printed. At the top, a designation code he recognized from his research. Below that, a date. Below that, names. Real names, not operator numbers. Names in a column with ranks and a command signature at the bottom that was partially legible, but enough. It was a record of the mission. A real one. Signed. "Liam," Tyler said, Liam came to the table. He looked at the document. He read it slowly, moving his lips slightly the way he did when he was processing something carefully. When he looked up, his expression was not surprised, but grave. "She knew," Tyler said. "Evelyn knew this was here." "She brought you the rifle to find it," Liam said. "She needed someone to open it who didn't already know what was inside, so there'd be a witness. Someone outside her family who could confirm the discovery independently." Tyler looked at the document, then at the rifle, then at the storage unit door, closed against the October night. He thought about what Evelyn was doing right now, wherever she was, with the 3 men who had come to the shop. He thought about what she knew that they didn't know yet, that the document was already out of the rifle, that whatever they'd come to suppress was already in other hands. She had planned this precisely. Every step of it. The shop she'd chosen, the man she'd chosen, the deal she'd offered, the way she'd fed him information in careful fragments so that he'd arrived at each conclusion himself, and therefore owned it fully. Even staying behind tonight. That had been part of it. Keep them occupied. You'll keep their attention on her while Tyler and Liam got clear. She was, Tyler realized, the most strategically intelligent person he had ever been in a room with. He stood up straight. "We're not hiding this anymore," he said. Liam looked at him. The storage unit was cold and dim and smelled of dust, and outside the thin metal walls, Harwick was going on with its ordinary Thursday night, and somewhere across town, 3 men with operational training had a 70-something-year-old woman in a room and believed they still had control of this situation. "If we go public," Liam said carefully, "they won't stop. These are not people who stop." Tyler looked at him. "They came to our shop tonight," he said. "They shoved you through a display case. They took Evelyn." He picked up the document and held it carefully. "Why, they already didn't stop." Liam held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't mean agreement exactly, but means I'm with you regardless. Tyler folded the document back to its original rectangle, placed it inside his jacket pocket against his chest, and picked up the rifle. Outside, the night was still and cold. Somewhere down Fenwick Road, a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping the chain-link fence. Tyler watched it go. He thought about his father's shop, the hand-painted sign, the workbench, the framed certificates, the refrigerator unit in the back that had hummed for 30 years. He thought about the display case in pieces on the floor. He thought about a man sitting somewhere in bad light, cutting 3 characters into steel with small tools, and knowing that the record he was making might be the last honest thing that survived. He held the rifle and the document and the weight of what they meant, and he thought, not anymore. They didn't sleep. The storage unit was cold in the way that only metal-walled spaces get cold at night. Not the gradual chill of an open field, but the specific, contained cold of a room that has no warmth of its own to give and draws it steadily out of whatever is inside it. Tyler sat on the concrete floor with his back against the wall, and Liam sat across from him on the overturned paint can, and they talked through everything in low voices until somewhere around 3 in the morning the talking ran out, and they just sat with it. The rifle was on the folding table. The document was inside Tyler's jacket, against his chest, warm from his body heat in a way that felt strange and appropriate at the same time. At 6:15, Liam's phone picked up a local news alert. He read it twice before he handed it across without a word. The headline was brief. Incident reported at business on Main Street, Harwick. No injuries confirmed. Investigation ongoing. No names. No details, nothing that would tell an ordinary reader anything specific. But the word incident sat in the sentence like a weight, and Tyler read it 3 times and felt the guilt of the night before settle more permanently into his chest. They'd taken Evelyn. That was what incident meant in the language of people who controlled what got reported and what didn't. They'd taken her, and they'd managed the information around it, and now it was a minor item on a local feed that would be forgotten by noon. He handed the phone back. "We're getting her back," he said. Liam didn't argue. He pressed his hand against his ribs. The injury from the display case was stiffer this morning, the way impact injuries always were the next day, and nodded. "Then we need to know where she is." They'd seen 2 cars in the lot. The one that had come during business hours, Harlan Cross's rental, dark, nondescript, and the second one, which had been there for 20 minutes before the lights went out. Liam had tracked both through the shop's exterior camera feed, which ran on a separate battery backup, and had kept recording through the power cut. He'd pulled the footage remotely on his phone during the night and watched it 3 times. The second car had plates, Tennessee registration, but the number came back to a shell company when Liam ran it through a contact he'd kept from his foundation years, a woman named Darlene who worked data verification and owed him a favor she'd been quietly relieved never to repay. She called back in 40 minutes. "Holding company," she said when Liam had her on speaker. "Registered in Delaware, filed in 2009, no public-facing activity. Address of record is a mail forwarding service in Nashville, but—" A pause. "The registered agent on the company is an attorney named Purcell, and Purcell shows up on 3 other shell filings over the past 15 years. One of those shells was used to lease a property in Dixon County. Remote, off the county road, about 11 acres. "When was the lease filed?" Liam asked. 2019. Still active. Liam looked at Tyler. "That's 40 minutes from here," Tyler said. "They borrowed Liam's cousin's truck. Liam made the call from the storage unit, kept it brief, said he needed it for the day, and he'd explain later, and he was sorry about the short notice. The cousin, to his credit, asked no questions and left the truck in a gas station parking lot on Route 9 with the key under the mat." While Liam drove, Tyler sat in the passenger seat, with the document open on his knee, reading it again in the gray morning light that came through the windshield. The names in the left column were the unit members, 6 of them, operator numbers beside each name. One of those numbers matched the code cut into the rifle's serial. He ran his finger along the corresponding row and found the name there in faded type. Walter Oakes. The man who had carried the rifle first. The man marked NE in the federal database. The man who had trained Evelyn's father and disappeared the morning after the mission ended. The command signature at the bottom of the document was partially legible. He could make out a rank abbreviation, he was almost certain of it, and the first 3 letters of a surname. That was enough, combined with everything else, to narrow it considerably. Liam had spent part of the night cross-referencing those fragments against political appointment records from the relevant period and had arrived at a name. A real name. A name that was attached, even now, to a foundation and a legacy and a portrait hanging in at least one government building. The document wasn't just evidence of a buried mission, it was evidence of who had buried it. Evelyn had carried this her entire adult life. She had inherited it from a man who had carried it for decades before her. She had walked into Tyler's shop with it wrapped in cream canvas, calm as standing water, and she had set it down in front of a young man who'd laughed at it, and she had known, with the long patience of someone who has waited long enough to recognize exactly the right moment, that this was the one. Tyler folded the document carefully and put it back inside his jacket. He thought about the hidden compartment in the rifle stock, the slim, flat space that had been fitted with such care that 4 days of examination hadn't revealed it until he'd understood enough to look properly. Walter Oakes had built that compartment himself. He was certain of it. Had built it, folded the document to size, sealed it in, and handed the rifle to the one man he trusted to carry it forward. Knowing that the compartment might never be opened, knowing it might be opened by the wrong person, knowing that the only thing he could control was making sure the record existed and that it was given to someone worth giving it to. He'd had to trust Evelyn's father, Evelyn's father had had to trust Evelyn. Evelyn had had to trust Tyler. The chain of it, the long, patient human chain of it, passing through decades of silence and danger, sat in his chest alongside the document and the weight of the rifle on the seat behind him. "We go in quiet," Tyler said. "I know," Liam said. "No heroics. We find where she is, we get to her, and we get out. The release goes when we're clear." Liam had spent the early morning hours setting up what he'd called a stage distribution, a system Tyler had only a partial understanding of, but trusted because Liam had built it with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Copies of the document, photographs of the rifle and its markings, the decoded composite serial, the research trail they'd assembled, all of it packaged and set to release to 11 separate recipients across 3 channels on a 2-hour delay timer. Journalists, an academic archive, a retired federal attorney Liam had worked with at the foundation. Not a single point of failure, not a single channel that could be shut down before the others had already transmitted. Once they activated it, the information would be out, fully, irreversibly. They were going to activate it. But first, they were getting Evelyn. Tyler had been clear about that. Liam hadn't needed convincing. The property in Dixon County came into view after 40 minutes on back roads, a long gravel drive off the county road, a gate that was closed but not locked, fields on both sides going pale and flat in the October morning. At the end of the drive, a low building, concrete block, industrial, the kind of structure that had been built for a practical purpose and never needed to look like anything. A prefabricated addition on the east side. 2 vehicles parked at the front. One of them was the dark car from the lot. Tyler had the door of the truck open before Liam had fully stopped. "East side," he said. "There'll be a secondary entrance on the addition." "How do you know?" "Because the main entrance is watched and the addition isn't." "Same logic as our service door." Liam looked at him for a moment. Then he reached under the seat and pulled out a flashlight, checked the battery, and climbed out. The morning was pale and cold and absolutely still. Their footsteps on the gravel were the loudest thing in the landscape. Tyler moved around the fence line, staying off the drive, working through the dead grass at the field's edge until the east wall of the addition came into view. A door there, metal, no window. He tried the handle, unlocked. He looked at Liam. Liam looked back. They went in. The interior of the addition was dim and smelled of damp concrete and something chemical, cleaning product, recently used. A corridor with 2 doors on the left side and one at the far end. Tyler moved down the corridor steadily, not running. Running made noise, and tried the first door. Storage. Empty shelving. Second door. Evelyn Carter sat in a folding chair in the center of a small room with a single high window, her hands resting in her lap, her back straight, her face turned toward the door as they opened it. When she saw Tyler, her expression didn't change dramatically. There was no relief in the theatrical sense, just that quiet recalibration, the same look she'd given him in the workshop 2 days ago when he'd told her he kept going after Gregson told him to stop. She looked at the rifle in his hands. "You found it," she said. "The compartment," he said. "Yes." She nodded once, slowly. "Can you walk?" Liam asked from the doorway. "I've been sitting in a chair," she said, with the closest thing to dry humor Tyler had heard from her. "I can walk." She stood, steady on her feet. Whatever they'd done to her in this room, it had not been physical. They'd wanted her compliant, not broken. They'd wanted to use her as leverage, Tyler realized. Leverage against whoever had the rifle. They hadn't understood that she had already finished what she'd come to do. Tyler offered her his arm. She took it, not leaning heavily, just the light contact of someone accepting courtesy. And they moved back down the corridor toward the east door. They were 8 feet from it when the far door at the corridor's end opened and a man stepped through. He was not one of the 3 from the shop. He was older, late 60s, Tyler guessed, silver-haired, wearing a jacket that was too considered to be casual. He had the bearing of someone for whom authority had been such a long habit that it no longer required assertion. And he simply stood in the corridor and looked at them with the measured disappointment of a man who had spent 50 years managing inconvenient situations. He looked at the rifle. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Carter," he said. His voice was composed, cultivated. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, just as composed, just as cultivated. The name landed on Tyler like a stone into still water. He knew the name, not from the document, from the research, from the cross-referencing Liam had done through the night. From a portrait in a government hallway and a foundation named after a 40-year legacy of public service, and a partial surname beginning with 3 letters that matched what was partially legible at the bottom of the mission record folded inside Tyler's jacket. This was the man who had authorized the mission. The man whose name had been zeroed from the record. The man who had sent 6 soldiers into darkness, found their success inconvenient, and arranged for the most dangerous of them to disappear. He was standing 8 feet away in a corridor that smelled of damp concrete, and he was looking at Tyler with the expression of someone prepared to make an offer. "You're in possession of something that belongs to a closed chapter," Aldridge said. "I understand the appeal of what you think you've found, but you don't understand the full context." "The unit designation," Tyler said. "The mission identifier. The operator number. The names in the left column." He reached into his jacket and withdrew the folded document. He held it up, not opening it, just holding it so Aldridge could see its shape. "Walter Oakes, to the man you had erased the morning after the mission ended." He paused. "I understand the context." Aldridge looked at the document. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, something moved behind his composed expression. Not quite fear. The recognition of a calculation that had finally, after decades, come up wrong. "Walk away," he said. His voice was still level. "Walk away, and this ends here. You go back to your shop. Mrs. Carter goes home. The rifle goes into a private archive where it will be treated with appropriate respect. Nobody is harmed. Nobody's life is disrupted." He looked at Tyler. "You're 26 years old. You have a business, a reputation, a future. Don't reduce it to this." Tyler looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Walter Oakes cutting 3 characters into steel in bad light, knowing he was about to disappear. He thought about Evelyn's father carrying a rifle through 40 years of ordinary life with the extraordinary weight of what it contained. He thought about Evelyn walking into a gun shop and setting that rifle down in front of a young man who laughed at it and waiting, patient as stone, for him to become someone worth giving it to. He thought about 6 names in a column on a handwritten document, 6 men who had done their jobs completely and been erased for it. "No," Tyler said. Aldridge looked at him. "Liam," Tyler said. From behind him he heard Liam's phone, the screen tapping twice in a specific sequence. The activation code they'd agreed on in the truck. The timer, which had been set to 2 hours, collapsed to 0. The distribution was live. 11 recipients, 3 channels. Photographs, documents. All decoded serial, research trail, everything they had built across 5 days in a gun shop in Harwick, Tennessee, everything Walter Oakes had encoded into a rifle and Evelyn's father had carried and Evelyn had waited decades to release, was moving through the world at the speed of a data connection on an October morning in Dixon County. Aldridge's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, then buzzed again. He reached for it slowly, the way a man reaches for something he already knows will be bad news. He looked at the screen. Tyler watched his face and saw the composed expression shift. Not collapse, not dramatically, but shift. The way a structure shifts when something essential is removed from its foundation, still standing, but changed, irreversibly changed. He looked up from the phone. He looked at Tyler, then at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back at him with the same quiet steadiness she had brought into Tyler's shop 5 days ago. She had not needed to say anything in this corridor. She had not needed to make a speech or issue a threat or perform any of the things that a lesser kind of person might have felt the situation required. She had simply stood in a corridor, arm lightly through Tyler's, and waited for the world to catch up to what she had already arranged. "It's done," Tyler said, not unkindly, just as a fact. Aldridge said nothing. He stood in the corridor for another 3 seconds, and then he stepped to the side, a small, precise movement, and the corridor was clear. They walked out. The morning outside the Dixon County facility was the same morning it had been when they went in. Pale sky, still fields. The gravel drive running back to the county road, the 2 vehicles by the front entrance, sitting exactly where they'd been. The world had not rearranged itself to reflect what had just happened inside. It didn't work that way, Tyler had learned. The world went on being the world, and the things that changed it changed slowly and mostly invisibly, working through systems and conversations and inboxes rather than through any moment you could point to and call the turning point. But something had been released. He could feel it. Not dramatically, not like a physical thing, but the way you feel the pressure change when a window opens in a sealed room. Something that had been held closed for a very long time had been let go. They walked to the truck. Evelyn moved at her own pace, measured and deliberate, the way she moved through everything. She didn't look back at the building. Tyler did once, and saw that the corridor door was closed and the facility sat in the morning exactly as it had sat, which would be the last time it sat that way before the calls started coming. At the truck, she stopped and turned to look at Tyler directly. She looked at him the way she had looked at the rifle when she first unwrapped it on his counter, with recognition and something careful beneath it, and the specific quality of attention that comes from understanding the full weight of what you're looking at. She looked at the rifle in his hands. "You found the compartment," she said again, but differently this time, not a confirmation, something else. "Your father built it," Tyler said. "Walter built it," she said. "My father preserved it." She paused. He was afraid at the end that the right person would never find it, that he'd spent his life carrying something that would just disappear with him. She looked out at the pale field. "I told him that if it was worth carrying this long, it was worth one more try." Tyler had nothing to say to that. He wasn't sure anything needed saying. Liam opened the truck's passenger door. "We should move," he said. They moved. On the drive back, Liam took calls. 2 of the 11 recipients had already replied to the distribution, and the 3rd call was from a number he didn't recognize that he let go to voicemail. His voice on the calls was steady and professional, the voice of someone who had prepared thoroughly for this and found the preparation holding. Tyler drove. Evelyn sat in the back seat and looked out the window at the October landscape going past. The sky was beginning to lighten properly now, the flat gray giving way to something thinner and cleaner, the kind of morning that comes after a night of pressure and announces itself without drama. She didn't speak for most of the drive, and Tyler didn't push. He watched the road and let the silence be what it was. Then she said, from the back seat, "He was 23 when they selected him, Walter." Tyler adjusted his hands on the wheel. "Your father?" "Walter Oakes," she said. "He was 23. He'd grown up in rural Alabama, educated himself, joined up because he believed in the idea of it, the service, the purpose. He was the best shot in any unit he'd been part of. They noticed that." She paused. And they noticed everything else about him, where he was from, what he looked like, who would ask questions if he didn't come home. They noticed all of that too. Tyler said nothing. He knew what they were using him for, she said. He told my father later that he'd known from the beginning. He wasn't naive, but he went because the mission itself was real, and the men beside him were real, and the thing they were being sent to find was real. She looked out the window. He just didn't know that the man who sent them had already decided what would happen afterward. Did he make it? Tyler asked. He wasn't sure why he asked it. He'd read the NE designation, had understood what it meant, but he wanted to hear it from her. I don't know, she said. My father never knew. He searched for decades and found nothing. After a certain point, he stopped searching and started. She paused, just holding it, the possibility that Walter survived somewhere, that he made himself unfindable on purpose rather than being made unfindable by someone else. A beat. I think my father needed that to be true. I'm not sure it matters which way it actually went. Tyler thought about Walter Oakes bending over the rifle with small tools, cutting 3 characters into the steel, building a record that only someone who knew what to look for would find, handing it to Evelyn's father and disappearing into the morning. It was possible that was a death. It was possible it was a vanishing, deliberate, chosen, the operational intelligence of a man who had been trained to survive the people he worked for. Tyler found, to his own slight surprise, that he believed the second version. He didn't know if he believed it because it was more likely or because the human in him needed it to be true. He decided it didn't matter. The county road gave way to Route 9, and Route 9 brought them into the south end of Harwick, and Harwick was doing what small towns do on weekday mornings. Gas stations open, a few pickups parked along Main, the Sunoco on the corner of Mercer, busy with the people who worked the early shift at the plant outside town. It all looked exactly the same as it had looked Tyler's entire life. He turned down Main Street and pulled up in front of Reed Precision Arms. The shop looked worse in daylight than he'd expected. The front door was undamaged. They'd unlocked it, not forced it, but through the window he could see the dark shapes of the overturned display case, the glass scattered across the floor, the general disarray of a space that had been moved through by people with no interest in its order. His father's workbench was visible through the interior doorway, the gooseneck lamp still angled where he'd left it. The framed certificates on the wall were all still there. He sat in the truck for a moment looking at it. Then he got out, unlocked the front door, and went in. The weeks that followed moved in the particular way that consequential things move. Not fast, not the way films suggest, but steadily through channels, through calls and requests and documents requested and received, through names appearing in print that had not appeared in print before, through the quiet machinery of accountability that takes time to engage, but, once engaged, does not stop easily. The document, authenticated by 2 independent forensic examiners and corroborated by the research trail Tyler and Liam had assembled. He entered circulation in ways that couldn't be recalled. The journalist who received it first published within 48 hours. The academic archive flagged it as historically significant and began its own verification process. The retired federal attorney filed a formal request with the relevant oversight body, citing specific statutes, and that request went into a system that had its own momentum. Aldridge's foundation released a statement 3 days later that neither confirmed nor denied specifics, but was written in the particular language of institutions that are beginning to understand that denial has become more expensive than management. It was not an admission. It was something adjacent to one, and over time those adjacencies accumulated. The names in the left column of the document, 6 of them, these operator numbers beside each, became the subject of a separate track. A researcher connected to the academic archive began the work of identifying families, of locating descendants, of starting the long and imperfect process of notifying people that a relative they had been told disappeared or died in unspecified circumstances had in fact been part of something real that had been deliberately erased. That work was slow. It would be slow for a long time. But it had started. Tyler read about it in pieces from the shop as it came through over days and then weeks. He read it the way you read about something you were inside, with the slight disorientation of seeing from the outside what you'd previously only known from within. He cleaned the shop, and it took 2 days to properly clear the glass and reset the display case. The case itself was salvageable, the glass replaced. He repainted the trim on the front door, which had needed it anyway. He reorganized the workbench, putting everything back in the order his father had established and that Tyler had gradually let drift over the years. He did this carefully, and it felt like something beyond tidying. The rifle sat on the bench throughout. He worked on it in the evenings, after closing, with the gooseneck lamp angled and the shop quiet around him. Not restoration, not in the sense of making it new, refinishing the wood, polishing the metal back to something it had been before time and use got hold of it. Preservation, stabilizing what was there. Stabilizing. He cleaning the corrosion to the point where the steel underneath was protected, but the history of the surface was still readable. Consolidating the crack in the stock with a reversible adhesive that would hold without altering. Treating the wood against further drying. He worked the way his father had worked, deliberately, without rushing, with the understanding that the object in his hands had its own right to exist as what it was, not as what someone else wanted it to be. On the 3rd week, Evelyn came back. She came in the same way she'd come the first time, the bell over the door, the deliberate walk to the counter, the composed expression. But something was different. Not her bearing, not her composure. Those were constants Tyler had learned, as much a part of her as anything structural. What was different was something underneath. A quality of weight she'd carried the first time that wasn't there now. Not absence exactly, but settled. The difference between a thing held in tension and a thing set down. She stood at the counter and looked at the shop. She looked at the refinished display case and the organized workbench and the frame certificate still on the wall. Then she looked toward the back, where the rifle sat on the bench under the lamp. She walked past the counter, through the interior doorway, and stood beside it. Tyler followed. He stood on the other side of the bench and watched her look at the rifle. She looked at it for a long time. Not urgently, not painfully, the way you look at something you have thought about for so long that seeing it in the actual present tense still requires adjustment. "You preserved it," she said. "That's what it needed," Tyler said. She reached out and placed one hand on the stock, not gripping, the same light contact Tyler had used the first night he'd sat alone with it in the dark. A recognition. An acknowledgement of something that had survived. "My father would have," she started, and then stopped, and there was a pause that Tyler didn't try to fill. He would have appreciated this. Tyler looked at the rifle. He thought about everything that object had been through, everything it had carried, everyone who had held it or hidden it or run with it through an October night in a small Tennessee town. He thought about the plaque he'd made. He'd made it himself from a piece of walnut he'd had in the back, cut it, sanded it, used a fine engraving bit to set the letters into the wood the way someone else had once set letters into steel. Oh, it wasn't elaborate. Just the words he'd thought about for 3 weeks, sitting with it until they were the right ones. He took it from the shelf where it had been sitting and set it on the bench beside the rifle. For the men who were never meant to be remembered. Evelyn looked at it. She read it once, then looked at the rifle again. The shop was quiet around them. From outside came the ordinary sounds of Harwick going about its morning. A truck on the road, the distant sound of the hardware store's delivery bay opening, a dog somewhere on the far side of the lot. The refrigerator unit in the back hummed its constant low note. Tyler didn't speak first. He'd been learning these past 3 weeks when to speak and when to let the silence be what it needed to be. He'd been learning a lot of things. Some of them were about history, and some of them were about himself, and the ones about himself were harder. Evelyn looked at the plaque for a long time. Then she straightened slightly, that small, deliberate movement she made when she was settling something internally, and she looked at Tyler. "He wasn't wrong about you," she said. Tyler looked at her. "Your father?" "Walter," she said. Tyler went still. "He left more than the document," she said. "He left instructions, careful ones, specific ones, written in the same hand as the mission record and sealed with it in the compartment." She paused. "Instructions for finding the right person, what to look for, where to look." Her eyes were steady on his. A young gunsmith who worked alone, who was skilled enough to identify it but had never heard of it. Or who had something to prove, and enough underneath that to do the right thing once he understood what right was. Tyler said nothing for a moment. "He couldn't have known," he started. "He described a type," she said, "not a person. He said, find someone at the beginning of understanding who they are. Those are the only people who can still be changed by what they learn." Tyler looked at the rifle. He looked at the plaque. He thought about a 23-year-old man in rural Alabama who had educated himself and joined up and been selected for all the wrong reasons and had responded to that by building the only honest record that survived. He thought about the chain, Walter to Evelyn's father, to Evelyn to him, each link held by someone who had chosen to carry it forward when not carrying it would have been easier. He thought about laughing. He thought about the moment Evelyn had said quietly in a gun shop on a Thursday afternoon, "You didn't even look at it properly." She was right. He hadn't. He'd glanced and rendered a verdict and moved on, the way he'd been doing with everything that didn't immediately confirm what he already believed about himself. He didn't do that anymore. He wasn't sure when exactly it had stopped, somewhere in the middle of those 5 days, in the gap between the arrogant young man who had laughed and the person who had run through an October alley with a rifle that mattered. But it had stopped, and he knew it, and that was the thing he would carry forward regardless of everything else. Evelyn looked at the rifle one more time. She didn't touch it again. She turned and walked back through the interior doorway, through the shop to the front door. The bell gave its flat jingle. At the door, she stopped. She turned back with the composed expression she'd walked in with 5 weeks ago, and she looked at Tyler across the length of the shop, past the refinished display case, past the framed certificates, past the counter where she'd first set a wrapped rifle down in front of a young man who thought he already knew what it was. "Thank you," she said. Then she was through the door, and the bell rang again as it closed, and Tyler heard her footsteps cross the gravel lot in the morning. He stood in his shop alone with the rifle and the plaque and the hum of the refrigerator unit. He looked at the gooseneck lamp angled over the bench, the warm circle of light it threw across the old steel and the cracked wood and the deliberate marks of a man who had understood that truth, properly encoded. He could outlast the people who wanted it buried. He reached out and straightened the plaque beside the rifle, just slightly, aligning it with the edge of the bench. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. He picked up his tools and went to work. If a man can spend years looking at things without ever truly seeing them, what have you been too quick to dismiss? Hit like and subscribe. We have more stories that will make you think twice.